If you're on the hunt for a sporty crossover SUV, the BMW X2 might tick every single box. Indeed, it's a little bit more agile and sportier looking at the expense of being less roomy in comparison to the equivalent BMW X1. Now, the X2 that we've got on review here is the plug-in variant. It's the xDrive25e to be specific. Now, the car itself, for the equivalent petrol or diesel variant, is around £2,000 premium, which in reality, if you break it down, doesn't actually cost that much, because not only will you be saving on fuel charges, you'll be lowering your CO2 emissions, and if you're buying this as a company car, you're going to lower your benefits in kind taxation by roughly around 25%, which can be quite big in the grander scheme of things. Now, if you'd like a detailed breakdown between the plug-in variant and the petrol and diesel variants, do check out our written review, will be down in the description below. Also down there you'll find links to our social media platforms, so if you're on Twitter or on Instagram, for example, we'd very much appreciate a follow. Allow you to keep up with the latest news and reviews from TotallyEV. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about the exterior design, but before we do so, I've got a bone to pick with BMW, and let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with me. But when I think of the M badge, I think of a high performance car. Think of the E46 M3. I think it's one of the best looking cars that's ever been built. Then compare it with the E46 330ci. Still a great looking car, but definitely no competition with the M badge vehicle, not only in terms of its actual look, but in terms of the actual performance. Now, the same couldn't be said in the modern era, where the BMW X2, xDrive25e, M Sport X actually is only to do with styling. Indeed, yes, the M badge only replicates the different styling that you get from the exterior of the vehicle, and there is some different changes in the interior as well. There are some minor changes as well in terms of suspension as well, but it's very minimal, and it really doesn't replicate in my head what the M badge actually means. Now, with that off my chest, let's get on to the actual styling of the car. Now, the model we've got here, and why I actually mentioned all that M badge branding, is because we've got the M Sport X, which adds really nice look to the car. In my opinion, I think it's one of the best looking crossover SUVs that can be found on the market, specifically if you're looking for a sporty looking car. Here, the front of the car has got a really fitting grille. It's got really nice intakes around the front bumper. Even the wheel arches, while they're plastic insert, and the same with the side skirts, they're quite aggressive in terms of styling. They're not quite round, they're kind of almost rectangular or square shape, should we say. The same could be said about the alloys. They come as standard 17-inch rims, but with the M Sport X you get 19-inch alloys with a Y-spoke design. It just looks really great. Now, equally at the rear of the car, it's also got a sporty design, from the tail light design to even the rear boot. In fact, here BMW have preserved an outward facing tailpipe, which is quite a rarity nowadays, because normally they're downward facing and hidden underneath the bumper, or shall we say towards near the chassis of the car. So it's nice to see it's actually retained it, and again still retains that kind of sporty look and edge to it. Now, elsewhere the car is available in different colours, and the one that we've got over here is a £550 option. You can of course save that off your final bill if you choose to go for a white option instead. Now, on the C-pillars you'll also find a BMW badge. This is actually a nod to the past with the BMW coupes of yesteryear. However, this is a little bit ironic given what we were just talking about with the M badge. Nevertheless, this is because BMW coins the X2 class as a sports activity coupe. Make of it what you will. Now, the same could be said about the interior of the vehicle, which has got a lot of reminiscence to the past, not only in terms of a styling point of view, which in my opinion has always been really good in BMW vehicles, but also with the use of, for example, a CD player that can be found on the dashboard. I know some people won't care about it, but others will definitely appreciate the fact that it has been included. I personally like the fact that it's got still physical climate control, which is much of a rarity nowadays, where a lot of manufacturers are opting for capacitive or touchscreen buttons instead, which I don't really quite understand this trend. Elsewhere, BMW has retained a physical control wheel by the center console in order for you to interact with the iDrive system, which is found on an 8.8-inch display, or if you have the Tech Pack option 2, that will give you the 10.25-inch display like we have got. Now, no matter which Tech Pack you go for, what you'll find is the Android Auto integration is just not present, at least not at the time of making this video. I'm sure it will roll out at a later stage, but it's disappointing to see that a car built in 2020 doesn't come as standard with Android Auto integration. Apple CarPlay, however, is included and is as standard, which I am laughing about it because it used to be an actual option for BMW customers, which I just can't see and comprehend why that was even an option instead of just being included as standard. Now, no matter if you use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, or indeed want to plug in your phone, there is no actual compartment storage space at the front of the center console to place your smartphone. Instead, you'll have to rely on, for example, a smartphone holder. If you want our suggestions, by the way, it'll be down in the description below, where we've tested a few and given our verdict as to our favorites that you should actually pick. Now, in this respect, there is a phone holder found within the front armrest, and that is part of the £900 tech option 1, I think it is. In this respect, you've got enhanced Bluetooth, at least that's what BMW claim, and also wireless charging capabilities. Now, while this is all well and good, the problem is that it's not quite caught up with modern times. In my case, I've got a Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus with a 6.4-inch display, and it doesn't fit in its wireless charging cradle. It just doesn't expand any more than it can. Instead, if you've got a phone that's 6-inch or lower, then it'll fit with no problems. But if not, the kind of option is somewhat redundant. Now, on the plus side, you can place your smartphone without wirelessly charging it underneath the front armrest, where you're also treated with a USB Type-C port for you to quick charge your phone, or indeed connect it up to the infotainment system. Now, on the subject of connectivity, you can also connect up to the car system via Bluetooth, and here you've got both the SBC and AAC codecs. The latter is good because it's better suited for higher quality transmission, and specifically those people on iOS, in other words iPhone devices, they'll very much appreciate this use of codec. Now, the car's system has got a 6-speaker audio system. If you're intrigued to know more details about it and how it actually sounds, do click up on your pop-up banner, or indeed down in the description below. What I'll say in a nutshell is that it's quite fun sounding, and despite it not having a subwoofer, will excite most people. Now, to control your media, you can do so via the touchscreen display, or indeed via the steering wheel, where on the right hand side you've got media control buttons, and you've also got integration with voice control, where you can also initiate Amazon Alexa. On the left hand side you've got cruise control buttons. Now, speaking about the steering wheel, it's actually pretty hefty in my opinion. I felt it's a bit too kind of thick, and I felt it would have been a little bit better served if it was a little bit slender. There's also no use of flappy paddles, which was definitely a kind of saddening thing, because when I came to the car, specifically an M Sport car, I was expecting some flappy paddles. Instead, you'll have to rely on the gear selector when you shift it to its M mode, and for you to select the gears, and we'll talk about in terms of its gearbox and transmission in just a bit. But what I will say is that in its M mode, it's a little bit harder to reach the gear selector, which wouldn't have been a problem if you had flappy paddles found on the steering wheel. Nevertheless, behind the steering wheel, you've got an instrument cluster that is part analog and part digital. I've got no complaints whatsoever over here. On the left hand side, you can see your speed, and the right hand side, you can see the RPM. Now, in front of you, you've got a head-up display. Now, this is an option, so you'll have to choose this if you want it. But the head-up display for me is a great addition, because it allows you to keep your eyes on the road rather than glancing down towards the instrument cluster. The only complaint I have, however, is the fact that the head-up display is just a little bit too high. Now, I know you can adjust it via the infotainment system, and indeed I did, and I put it to its minimum point, but I still found that it was just still too high for my liking. I wish it was just a little bit lower down. And for someone who's just under 6 foot, it meant that it was either obstructing my view a little bit from the car in front, or it meant that if I was slouching a little bit, I would no longer see my head-up display, which is just a shame, because I just love its inclusion, and I just feel that it does add a little bit to your safety, because it means that you can keep your eyes planted on the road, see all the key information such as your speed and the speed limit, and even adjust, let's say, your media controls through the steering wheel, and see them pop up on your head-up display as to what song you're selecting. Now, what has been optimized, however, is the boot design. Not only can you open it up with the press of a button, but it's also electronically adjustable via a button that can be found at the top of the boot lid. Now, the space that you've got inside the BMW X2 is pretty impressive. You've got around 410 litres with the seats up. Pop down the seats and you've got 1,290 litres. Of course, this won't compete with the likes of the BMW X1 that offers 450 and 1,470 litres respectively. However, what I do like with the BMW X2 is the fact that they've integrated storage for your cables. It can be found underneath the boot floor. It's also got a 40-20-40 split split for the rear seats, which effectively means that you can customize it to your heart's content. And if you're not having a rear middle occupant, you can essentially have, let's say, a set of skis. Furthermore, the seats also fold flat, which is also great to see and makes loading in and out of the vehicle very seamless. Now, storage space within the cabin is also plentiful, despite it being a little bit smaller than the BMW X1, for example. In this respect, there is compartment storage within each of the 4 doors, where the front ones are actually a little bit too large. So if you have a 500ml bottle, you'll find it kind of wobbles around. At the rear of the cabin, you've got the spaces within the rear doors again, but they're a little bit more slender, making it a little bit more convenient to, let's say, place away a 500ml bottle with a large size purse or wallet. And then you've also got compartment storage within the rear segment of the front seats. Now, there is also an armrest that can be pulled down if you don't have a middle occupant, and indeed the car will seat 5 occupants in total because of the included seat belts. And here it will also reveal 2 cup holder spaces, which is useful for longer journey drives. Now, in terms of the seat comfort, the middle seat is a little bit stiff, which is unsurprising. The rear seats themselves are a little bit firm as well. Now, it's nice to see there is electronically adjustable seating specifically for the driver, although I don't quite like the fact that this is included only as an option rather than included as standard, as one might expect in a car that costs upward of £39,000. Now, as for legroom, I've got enough space and I'm just under 6 foot with relatively long legs. At the front, there's absolutely no issues whatsoever. The same could go for headroom at the front. However, at the rear, it's a little bit more cramped because I'm just under 6 foot and there's barely any space above my head. Even though BMW have kind of curved the rear segment of the roof, it's just not as roomy as the likes of the X1, a larger size SUV, or let's say certain estates out there. And so this leads us on to driving comfort, and it's a little bit of a mixed bag in this domain. The reason why I say that is because, well, it depends where your priorities lie. If you want a cushiony, soft experience and one that's well insulated from the exterior world, this really isn't it. If we compare it to the likes of the Audi e-tron, for example, which has got one of the quietest cabins that I've come across and one of a fantastic air suspension, well, that's really not what you're getting with the BMW X2. In fact, the actual seats themselves are a little bit stiff and the cabin itself isn't that well insulated. You're going to hear road noise coming in, namely from the tires. There's a little bit of tire noise that creeps into the cabin, and it's definitely noticeable when you're going on the motorway at speed. As for the suspension, well, this is a sports utility coupe after all, at least that's what BMW coined it to be. And it does make you feel that way because when you're going over speed bumps or you're going over potholes, you're going to feel them. And depending on how you drive, you might actually find yourself a little bit uncomfortable on the BMW X2, specifically when you're comparing it to the likes of the BMW X1 or X5 as we're just passing by right now. So it just really depends on your priorities, and the reason I say that is because the suspension setup really does come into fruition when you take it on country roads, and here is where the car really shines because there is very little body roll, and furthermore the actual driving performance and the driver's feel that you get from the setup that BMW have is absolutely excellent, to say the least. Indeed, that's what really sets this car apart from its larger sibling or other competitors out there. It's got this driver's feel that really can't be replicated. From no other crossover SUV have I had the feeling of being confident while driving around country roads at speed, and further actually enjoying it when I'm driving. Now, this also is aided by the fact that the X2, at least a plug-in hybrid variant, has got the xDrive system. That's an all-wheel drive system that's developed by BMW and gives you further grip on the road and gives you a little bit of extra confidence if you're going to be in a little bit of a trickier terrain. Now, aside from the handling characteristics, this also does come into play in terms of its performance, because combined with both the electric motor and its 1.5 litre 3-cylinder engine, you will get around 162 kilowatts of power, which equates to around 220 horsepower. Both of these dispatched 385 Newton meters of torque, which means that you're not going to be left, well, without a smile on your face when you get away from the lights or when you're doing an overtake maneuver on the motorway. Speaking of which, to get to 60 miles an hour from a standstill, it'll take around 6.16 seconds, and top speed is limited to 112 miles an hour, where if you go in all electric mode, this will be limited to 84 miles an hour instead. Now, in terms of the transition between its petrol engine and its electric motor, this can be determined by the eDrive mode, which essentially allows you to customize how you want the car to behave. If you have it in max eDrive mode, it will prioritize its electric motor at all times. Put it on save, it will essentially try and save as much battery as possible so that you can use the battery at a later date. Or if you go on the auto mode, which is the one I would suggest, this would give you basically a best of both worlds, where the car will determine for itself what is best for you to use. Now, beside the eDrive button, there is a drive mode selector where you can choose between Comfort, Eco Pro or Sport mode. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that Comfort mode will default each time you step inside the vehicle, so if you do prefer driving in Eco Pro or Sport mode, then you'll have to do that and initiate that each time you step inside the car. Now, the Sport mode itself means that you've got a fantastic throttle response, and the same could be said in terms of how the car actually feels when you're going at speed on country roads. Now, in this respect, if you want to drive in a pneumatic type of mode, in other words, for you to use the gear selector and change gears, you can do so by kind of shifting it to the left. Again, it's a shame not to see any flappy paddles included, and the fact that the gear lever is a little bit at a distance when you shift to the left, and means that, you know, shifting between your gears isn't as well intuitive as, let's say, a Sporty or Coupe. Now, on that note, the 6-speed Steptronic transmission is absolutely flawless. I think BMW have actually nailed this transmission because it just feels so seamless. Shifting between the gears, be it automatically in sport mode because you can let the car do its thing, or in this pneumatic mode where you're basically adjusting the gears yourself, it's just seamless. You do not feel a single gear shift, and the way it progresses through those 6 gears is just absolutely buttery smooth, and I must say I really do appreciate it. Now, aside from spirited driving, this car will be used as a daily driver by most, and in this respect it's worth bearing in mind that you have got its electric battery to utilize. It's 10 kilowatt hour battery, should I say more specifically. Now, here BMW claim that you'll get around 31 to 32 miles. In reality, from my testing, it gets around 25 miles on a single charge, which should be enough for those people doing their daily commute, specifically if you come home and you're able to charge. If, however, you're doing longer distance commutes, then you're going to have to resort to its, well, hybrid function instead. In other words, using the petrol or the 36 litre tank. Speaking of which, its 36 litre tank will get you around 39 miles per gallon, which is decent for a car of its class. Now, back onto the electric portion of it, you can of course charge it. It's a plug-in hybrid after all. Now, it does take an absolute age to recharge. If you were to use a wall socket, it's going to take you around 3 hours to charge to around 80%. If, however, you resort to a wall box, this time can be brought down to around 2 hours, which makes it a little bit more acceptable. Now, there is a portion of regenerative braking which occurs, and you can see it kind of notified on your instrument cluster. This comes into effect specifically if you're putting your foot down on the brake, but there's no way of adjusting the different level modes like you'd find on an all-electric vehicle. But this shouldn't come as a surprise because this is a plug-in hybrid after all, so it's doing it intelligently, and I found that actually the amount that it recoups is actually pretty good and actually can be felt through the amount of mileage that's remaining. Now, as for the safety systems, This is pretty basic in my opinion. Now there is lane departure warning which you can initiate from a button on the dashboard, and as we're on the motorway right here, I can enable it. The only thing that it will do is it will give me a slight little jolt on my steering wheel if I were to deviate to the other line. It won't really try and keep me in lane, and truthfully I ended up disabling it more than anything because I just felt that it didn't really aid in terms of my safety. Other than the head-up display, which is an option, there is no blind spot assist, and the reversing camera is also an option which you'll have to purchase. On the plus side, there is front and rear parking sensors, which makes parking just a little less stressful, specifically for those who might not be as confident to park. Now elsewhere you do have cruise control, but again it's pretty basic, at least in the standard variant, so you don't have adaptive cruise control. And also there is the speed recognition system, which basically uses a camera and your built-in navigation system to determine what the road and speed limit is. I actually found this to be really accurate, and therefore gives you a good indication for any sort of incoming speed traps that you should be aware of. So here BMW have done a good job in this domain. Ultimately, I just feel that the safety systems are a little bit lackluster, and I wish that there were just a bit more of included safety features which would make maybe longer distance driving, specifically on the motorway, a bit more of a breeze. Now this all really leads me on to my verdict. What do I make about the BMW X2 plug-in hybrid? Well, it's not quite perfect in the respect that its safety features are a little bit lackluster. It's not as roomy as the likes of the BMW X1 or other estates or SUVs on the market. And in terms of the technology that's integrated, I feel that it's just a little bit outdated. Furthermore, in terms of its suspension, it's a little bit stiff. It won't be for everyone, but it does have a major role when it comes to its driving dynamics. And here it's ultimately why you'd be considering or potentially buying the BMW X2 over its rivals, or indeed the BMW X1 that BMW also offers, of course. In this respect, the BMW X2 is so much fun to drive, and with the use of the electric motor, the battery and its petrol engine, it combines to have a fantastic combination that will leave you with a smile on your face each time you set foot in the car. Furthermore, it absolutely looks stunning in my opinion, and the interior as well also suits. So as a result, this car gets TotallyEV's Performance Award for very much what the name would suggest. It's a great performer, although not quite perfect to get our Best Buy award. So that's just my thoughts and opinions about the BMW X2 plug-in hybrid. Do let me know in the comments below what you make of it. And of course, if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more, and of course favourite and share, as it always helps the channel grow. I've been Chris from TotallyEV. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.